So we're in China?
We are who we are. Why don't I be me and you be you? We're spreading color around us. We're lighting up the sky, it's what we do. We shouldn't care.
My name is Marta, and I am a mom and a wife. A wife first, then a mom. And we have 3 kids, 1 on the way.
You will like me just the way I am. I will like you just the way you are.
My name's Marta Joy, and this is my wife. And we've been married now 16 years.
That's it.
I'm losing my train of thought now.
I'm not from here. I was actually born and raised in Poland. I was 11 when I moved to Chicago, and then I lived in Chicago until I met him.
Yep, so we met at a rave in Chicago. Yep. New Year's of '99 going into 2000. So I was 17. I had just graduated high school and was down there with some of my friends, and stumbled on this bundle of energy. And it was definitely love at first sight. I actually had told my friend that night that I was in love with her and I was going to marry her, and he thought I was the craziest person ever. But sure enough, here we are all these years later, and somehow it worked out.
It worked out. Somehow. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and so then it kind of just, rolled from there. From the night that I met her, we were kind of just connected at the hip from that point on.
Inseparable.
Yeah, I mean, really, really inseparable. Yeah, so we have two biological kids, and so Grayson was born in November of 2000, and so he's 17 right now, and so yeah, he was a year and a half old when we got married. So we have a 17-year-old now, and then we have a 14-year-old daughter that was born in June of 2004.
And her name is Kasia.
And her name is Kasia.
We gave her a Polish name.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes.
And then we have Mila. We adopted from China almost 2 years ago. She got home in September, and she's 4 now, and we're about to adopt again, Alora.
And so what made us think about adoption and really get on the path of going through adoption? We were comfortable.
Could have slept here for days.
I just felt like the idea of adoption was like chasing me a little bit.
For a number of years, we had been involved with an organization called Gospel for Asia. So we had been sponsoring, a handful of kids and some missionaries that were in India. They primarily deal with India. Man, there was a time at my job in San Antonio where I was reading some books by a guy named K.P. Yohannan that runs this Gospel for Asia. And there's 2 books. One of them was called No Longer a Slum Dog, and the other one was called Revolution in World Missions. And so I was sitting reading this book, and just starting to understand the plight of these children that were in overseas environments, especially in India, where they have this caste system, where they have the people that are very affluent and kind of run, and depending what type of family you're born into, depends on kind of your rank in society, all the way down to what they call the Dalits. The people that they literally live in garbage. It's trash, and these kids grow up playing in puddles of, you know, human excrement and garbage. And I mean, it's just horrible, horrible living conditions. And I remember reading a passage in one of those books about how this guy, K.P. Yohannan, had gone to India. And there was a couple situations. I mean, there was one where he would continuously see this little boy that was in the village market all the time. And he would talk to him each time that he went. And he visited one time, and you know, I think the boy was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And he would see him repeatedly, and one time he went and he wasn't there anymore. And so he started asking, what happened to this little boy? What happened to this little boy? And he came to find out that this little boy had died because he was, you know, they're so starving that he was eating dirt. You know, this little boy had consumed so much dirt and ended up getting some bacteria in his stomach that he obviously couldn't ward off because there's no medicine or anything. And this little boy ended up dying.
I did a lot of bad.
And what some of these stories lead to is probably one of the most gut-wrenching ones, you know, and one that makes me emotional almost every time. And this particular one was what really brought me to tears, was how he had experienced a situation there where he walked into a building and there was a small girl, probably around the age of 9, that was in a cage with a line of men standing there waiting to rape her. And
Human trafficking.
The thought of being vulnerable made me feel less than I am. I have never felt whole.
it was a side of the world that is just so ugly, and that I think so many people just avoid. And you know, we hear about it a lot now, it's on the news. I mean, you know, I think people in general are much more aware of human trafficking, but I'm not sure people are so aware of like the extent, you know, and the impact of what's going on in some of these very, like these third world countries.
'Cause here in your arms I can finally let go. The rest of the world is outside when you made sure I'm all you.
So what brought our attention to special needs? And so there's a little bit of backstory there. And so so we had gotten to the point where we were going to get kind of those kids that were, you know, didn't have as many special needs. And so we were really excited, and we talked with our agency and we said, hey, okay, here we are. Like, how long do you think it's going to take now? And so, you know, again, we were at like 16 months into this process at this point. And they said, you know, great, you know, based off of the medical conditions that you've selected on your sheet, you could be looking at, you know, another 12 months. And so that really, I mean, it was disappointing, you know, obviously. I mean, you get in this process and there's a lot of emotions involved. And after 16 months into this process, you know, we've already looked at the faces of thousands of kids, you know, on different lists. That realistically are probably never going to be in a home. And so Martha and I, we really started talking, and you know, kind of getting back to just counting our blessings. And it's like, you know, we were blessed to have 2 kids of our own that have always been healthy. We've never had any issues that have transpired with them medically. You know, we really had to do some reflection and figure out what was our ultimate goal here. Was our goal to get another child for our family, or was ultimately our goal to provide our family for some child that didn't have one? We had gone in and modified the medical condition checklist and added a few more special needs that we thought we could really handle. One of them being like congenital heart defects.
Well, and it's no longer like a thing on a paper, you know, it's no longer like congenital heart defect. There's like a flesh, human, you know, body that's attached to this. So you see this little face, and you see congenital heart defect, like it's like a human being now. So it became more personal to us each time that we began to sponsor these little kids and pray for them. And
So, you know, we sat down and we were like, well, hey, why don't we, what do you think about adopting a child that has Down syndrome? Man, you know, I mean, that's a lifelong commitment. It's totally, you know, 180 degrees from where we kind of started off on this process.
You are the solution. You are the solution.
Yeah, so I immediately started looking on Facebook groups, because that's a really good place to look, and kind of joined one of the Down syndrome groups, Down syndrome adoption on China Down syndrome adoption on Facebook. It's a huge group full of amazing moms. I think maybe I commented something on somewhere, but the same night I received a private message from someone that I was not friends with on Facebook, and they had the lady, she was a director for an adoption agency, and she asked if we would be willing to look at some of their babies. She said probably close to 90% of our files that they hold in their agency have Down syndrome, but 0% of their families are willing to even look at them. So their families that were in process with the adoption agency were not even willing to look at these kids that have Down syndrome, because it's such a scary need, I guess. And so she, you know, we were already with another agency, so we were a little iffy about it, but we talked about it, and we said, okay, fine, we'll look at your babies and, you know, see what comes of it. It doesn't hurt to look. And by this time we have seen, like he said, hundreds of babies, thousands of babies' faces. And there's this thing in the adoption world, the question always comes well, how will you know if this is your child?
Right.
You'll just know. That was always the answer. And I'm like, well, but how? How do you know? You'll just know. So this lady sends us, you know, the login to their private page that you can look at their babies. And he was at work, I was at home, we're sitting on a computer kind of chatting. We're scrolling through this files and files of babies, and it was on the third page. He's like, go to the third page. Oh my goodness. And I went to the third page and I saw the same face that he was looking at. And it was like everything just went out of existence, but this baby's face, and it was Mila.
Yeah, it was just like a lightning bolt. I mean, it was just, we just knew.
We were zinged.
So now we're parents of a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and now a 4-year-old who had she has a corrected congenital heart defect, which they don't, you know, think is going to be any issue down the road, and she also has Down syndrome, you know, so.
Yeah. This is why I feel a little guilty talking about traveling and going to get Mila, because you have all those fears, you know, kids don't always attach well to families because they've not known what family means, and they're being taken away from everything they know. We smell different, we look funny, we talk funny, and they're being taken away from these Chinese nannies that they've developed relationships with and they've loved. And, you know, I mean, the only life they really know, even though it may not have been the best life, it's really all they know.
You know, to be in a situation now as a father of a child that has special needs that was born by another mother, you know, and I think it's definitely important that, you know, we make the point that a lot of these kids were loved. You know, we got a letter when we were getting possession of Mila over there, right? We're at the civil affairs office and we're getting guardianship and finalizing the adoption. And it is this momentous, joyful occasion that you're going through. And then our guide hands us this translated letter and says, we have a letter from her birth mom. you know, so you get this letter, and it says, you know, we love our daughter, you know, we've spent all of our money, you know, trying to get her better, and we've borrowed money, and there is no money left, and we just want her to live, and we want her to be healthy. And so, you know, it puts things into perspective.
The letter closes with, please give her a chance at life.
So why don't we try and end this final goodbye with love, so we can make it.
You know, and we have her biological birth name, you know, which, you know, it's actually, from my understanding, it's illegal to abandon your kids in China like they do. You know, and the way that it was explained is that the last name on this baby is like Smith, you know what I mean, in the United States. So I mean, it's a very generic, you know, last name. But to like wrestle with these emotions where I'm like, I'm getting this daughter that we've been waiting for so long, only to find out like there's this grieving mother.
Won't you save me? Won't you save me?
It's tough, you know. So I mean, it's like, you know, all kids, they're not all that fortunate with the situation. I mean, sometimes it's just they really just weren't wanted, you know. But like in this case, you know, it's totally different, where this mother did want this child, and it was the ultimate sacrifice by, you know, giving this child up to give her a chance to possibly live, you know. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that, and you know, it was a major struggle for me when I got back here. You know, to where there is just like so much affluence, you know, people have everything that they need, and it's like we jokingly kid about, oh, first world problems, you know, and it's like that's really what it is, you know. I mean, it's like, I mean, if I get sick, if I cut an arm off or something, I'm gonna live. You know, I mean, it's like there's a very high probability like I'm going to live through it.
I had to stay strong.
It was such an amazing experience, you know, and we had the opportunity to go to Mila's orphanage, and it was probably the most difficult part about the whole process, because we walked into this like civil affairs building, and there was 400 kids in there under the age of 18. I mean, 400 kids, you know, and we saw these babies that were laying in cribs. And, you know, a very common thing that you'll see is hydrocephalus, which is like water on the brain that these kids have. I mean, and I saw these kids laying there with heads like, I mean, just so big. I mean, just wrapped in gauze, and they're just laying there like staring at the ceiling. And I looked at one of the orphanage workers, and I just said, you know, what do you do with these kids? And they just said, we just try to make them as comfortable as we can. You know, I mean, and so it's like,
Save me.
and so you can't adopt 400 kids, but you know, I can adopt one, you know, and to that child, it just made all the difference.